Kelly Martinez stood in the hallway of her apartment building at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, staring at her front door in complete disbelief. The key that had worked perfectly that morning was now useless. The lock had been changed. Her groceries hung heavy in plastic bags, cutting into her fingers. Her laptop bag weighed down her shoulder, and 17 missed calls from an unknown number glowed on her phone screen. What started as an ordinary day at her marketing job was about to become the most bizarre landlord-tenant nightmare she'd ever experienced.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The day had begun like any other for Kelly. She'd left her studio apartment on Maple Street in downtown Portland at 7:30 a.m., double-checking that her door was locked as usual before heading to her job at Meridian Creative Agency. The small apartment wasn't much to look at, cramped with outdated fixtures and a radiator that clanged through the night, but it was affordable at $1,200 a month, and the location was perfect for her commute. Kelly had been living there for 8 months, ever since she'd moved to Portland from Sacramento for the marketing position. The building was owned by Patricia Hendricks, a stern woman in her mid-50s who managed the property herself from her home office 2 blocks away. Patricia had always been particular about rent collection and building maintenance, but she'd never been unreasonable. Their interactions had been minimal but professional: monthly rent payments through an online portal, the occasional building notice slipped under doors, and brief conversations when they crossed paths in the lobby. That Tuesday morning, Kelly had rushed through her usual routine: coffee, quick shower, checking emails while getting dressed in her navy blazer and black slacks. She'd grabbed her keys from the small dish by the door, locked up, and jogged down 3 flights of stairs to catch the bus. Nothing seemed unusual. The elderly man from 2B had waved from his window as she passed on the sidewalk. Mrs. Chen from the ground floor was watering her plants in the courtyard. Everything was normal. At work, Kelly had been buried in a campaign presentation for their biggest client, Cascade Outdoor Gear. The morning flew by in a blur of design revisions, client calls, and strategy meetings. She'd barely looked at her phone except to check the time. Lunch had been a quick salad at her desk while reviewing market research. The afternoon brought more meetings, a conference call with suppliers, and final touches on advertising layouts that were due by end of day. Around 2 p.m., her phone had started buzzing with calls from a number she didn't recognize. Kelly was in back-to-back meetings, so she'd let them go to voicemail, assuming it was a spam call or wrong number. The calls kept coming: 2:15, 2:33, 2:47, 3:12. Each time, Kelly was presenting to clients or discussing campaign strategies with her team. She made a mental note to check the voicemails later. By 4:30 p.m., 17 missed calls from the same number had accumulated on her phone. During a brief break between meetings, Kelly finally listened to the first voicemail. The voice was unfamiliar, professional, but urgent. Miss Martinez, this is David Chen from Evergreen Property Management, calling about your apartment at 847 Maple Street. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your tenancy. Please call back as soon as possible at 503-555-7829. Kelly's stomach tightened. Evergreen Property Management? She'd never heard of them. Patricia Hendricks managed her building directly. There had to be some mistake. She tried calling back, but the line was busy. The second voicemail was more insistent. Miss Martinez, David Chen again. We've been trying to reach you all afternoon. There's been a change in your rental situation that requires immediate discussion. We need to arrange for property access. Please call immediately. The third voicemail made Kelly's hands shake slightly as she held her phone. This is our final attempt to reach you today, Miss Martinez. Evergreen Property Management has assumed control of your building as of this morning. We need to discuss your lease status and arrange for immediate property inspection. If we don't hear from you within the hour, we'll need to proceed with securing the property. Kelly stepped into an empty conference room and dialed the number with trembling fingers. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Evergreen Property Management, David Chen speaking. This is Kelly Martinez. I got several messages from you. Miss Martinez, thank you for calling back. I'm afraid there's been a significant development regarding 847 Maple Street. The property has been transferred to our management effective immediately due to foreclosure proceedings against the previous owner. Foreclosure? That's impossible. I pay my rent every month. Patricia Hendricks owns the building. I understand this is confusing, Miss Martinez. However, Mrs. Hendricks defaulted on her mortgage payments, and the bank has repossessed the property. We've been hired to manage the transition. We need to conduct immediate inspections of all units and review existing leases. Kelly sank into a conference room chair, her mind reeling. What does this mean for my lease? I have a valid rental agreement through next March. That's exactly what we need to discuss. We'll need to see your lease documentation and determine which agreements remain valid under the new ownership. Can you meet us at the property this evening? I'm at work until at least 6. Can we meet tomorrow? There was a pause. I'm afraid that won't work, Miss Martinez. We need access today to secure the property properly. The bank requires immediate assessment of all units. Well, I can't leave work right now. I have client presentations until 6. I understand your position, but we have our obligations as well. We'll need to proceed with property security measures. Please contact us as soon as you're available this evening. The line went dead. Kelly stared at her phone, her heart racing. Something felt very wrong about the entire conversation. David Chen had been professional but pushy, and the timeline seemed impossibly fast. Foreclosures didn't happen overnight, and property management companies didn't typically need immediate access to apartments with valid leases. Well, I can't leave work right now. I have client presentations until 6. I understand your position, but we have our obligations as well. We'll need to proceed with property security measures. Please contact us as soon as you're available this evening. The line went dead. Kelly stared at her phone, her heart racing. Something felt very wrong about the entire conversation. David Chen had been professional but pushy, and the timeline seemed impossibly fast. Foreclosures didn't happen overnight, and property management companies didn't typically need immediate access to apartments with valid leases. She tried calling Patricia Hendricks directly, but the call went straight to voicemail. Kelly left a message explaining the strange calls and asking Patricia to contact her immediately. Then she attempted to focus on her remaining work tasks, but concentration was impossible. By 6 p.m., Kelly had finished her client presentations and was packing up her desk when her phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. Property has been secured due to lack of tenant cooperation. Contact the office tomorrow to discuss lease status and property access. Kelly's blood ran cold. She grabbed her things and rushed out of the office, calling an Uber instead of waiting for the bus. During the 20-minute ride home, she tried Patricia's number 3 more times. Each call went straight to voicemail. The Uber dropped her at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. Kelly walked quickly toward her building, grocery bags from a lunch-hour shopping trip cutting into her fingers. As she approached the familiar brick building, everything looked normal from the outside. The same potted plants sat by the entrance, the same faded awning stretched over the front steps. But when Kelly reached the 3rd floor and approached apartment 3C, her world tilted. The doorknob looked different, shinier, newer. She inserted her key and turned. Nothing. The key wouldn't budge. She tried again, jiggling the key and pushing on the door. The lock had definitely been changed. Kelly stood in the hallway, grocery bags at her feet, trying to process what had happened. Her apartment had been locked up while she was at work by people claiming to represent a property management company she'd never heard of. Her landlord wasn't answering her phone, and she had no way to get into her own home where all her belongings waited behind a door she could no longer open. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, Kelly's mind raced through her options. She could hear the muffled sounds of television from neighboring apartments, the familiar creaks and settling noises of the old building, but her own front door remained stubbornly sealed against her. The grocery bags had left red marks across her palms where the plastic handles had cut in, and her laptop bag felt impossibly heavy on her shoulder. Kelly pulled out her phone and tried Patricia Hendricks again. This time, instead of going straight to voicemail, the phone rang once before a recorded message played. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Her heart sank. That was Patricia's number from their lease agreement, the same number she'd used for 8 months to contact her landlord about maintenance issues and lease questions. Fighting in panic, Kelly walked down to the 1st floor and knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. The elderly woman had lived in the building for 12 years and knew everyone. If anyone would have information about what was happening, it would be her.
Mrs. Chen opened the door wearing a floral housecoat, her gray hair pinned back with bobby pins. Kelly, what are you doing in the hallway so late? Mrs. Chen, I'm locked out of my apartment. Someone changed my locks while I was at work today. Have you seen any maintenance people or strangers in the building? The older woman's eyes widened. Oh my goodness, yes. There were 2 men here around noon with toolboxes and official-looking papers. They said they were from some property management company. I thought it was odd because Patricia usually handles everything herself, but they showed me documents and said there had been changes in building ownership. What did these men look like? Did you get their names? One was tall and thin, maybe 40 years old, wearing a gray uniform shirt. The other was younger, stockier, with a baseball cap. The older one said his name was Mike something. They went to several apartments on different floors. I heard drilling and hammering for about 2 hours. Kelly's stomach dropped. Did they change other people's locks too? I don't think so. I saw them working on your door and maybe 1 or 2 others, but not every apartment. They said something about units that needed immediate securing due to lease violations. Lease violations? I've never violated my lease. I pay rent on time. I haven't damaged anything. I don't have unauthorized pets or roommates. Mrs. Chen shook her head sympathetically. I'm sorry, dear. I wish I had more information. Have you been able to reach Patricia? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Her phone number is disconnected. This is all so strange. After thanking Mrs. Chen, Kelly climbed the stairs to check if any of her neighbors were home. Mr. Rodriguez in 3A wasn't answering his door, but she could hear his television playing inside. The apartment across the hall, 3D, had been vacant for 2 months. At the end of the hall, she knocked on Mr. Peterson's door. Gary Peterson, a freelance graphics designer in his 30s, opened the door holding a coffee mug. Hey, Kelly, what's up? Gary, thank God you're home. Someone changed the locks on my apartment while I was at work. Did you see anything unusual today? Actually, yeah. I was working from home and heard a lot of noise in the hallway around lunchtime. 2 guys with tools were messing with your door, and maybe 1 other. I thought maybe Patricia was finally upgrading the old locks. Did they try to contact you or change your locks? No, they didn't touch mine, but I overheard them talking about which units were on their list. It sounded like they were only doing specific apartments, not the whole building. Kelly felt increasingly confused. Did you catch anything else they said? Gary scratched his beard thoughtfully. Something about paperwork from downtown, and one of them mentioned checking tenant payment history. It seemed official, but now that you're asking, it does seem weird that they'd lock you out without warning. Kelly thanked Gary and retreated to the building's small lobby to think. She sat on the worn wooden bench near the mailboxes and tried to piece together what had happened. Someone claiming to represent Evergreen Property Management had called her repeatedly, demanding immediate access to her apartment. When she couldn't leave work, they'd apparently sent workers to change her locks. But the story about foreclosure didn't add up. Foreclosure proceedings took months, not hours. She Googled Evergreen Property Management on her phone. A professional website appeared with Portland addresses and services listed, but something felt off about the site. The testimonials seemed generic, and the staff photos looked like stock images. When she tried to call the main number listed on the website, it went straight to an automated system that didn't match David Chen's direct extension. Kelly's phone battery was dying, so she walked to the 24-hour diner 3 blocks away to charge it and figure out her next move. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she ordered coffee and plugged her phone into the outlet by her booth. While waiting for it to charge, she called her sister in Sacramento. Kelly, it's pretty late to be calling. Is everything okay? Sarah, I'm in a really weird situation. Someone locked me out of my apartment today, and I think it might be some kind of scam. Kelly explained the entire day's events while Sarah listened with growing alarm. This sounds like those rental scams you hear about, where people pretend to be property managers to get access to apartments. Have you called the police? I wasn't sure if it was a police matter, since they claim to be legitimate property management. Kelly, legitimate property managers don't change locks without proper notice and legal procedures. Even if there was a foreclosure, tenants have rights. You need to call the police and report this, and you should also contact a lawyer who specializes in tenant rights. Kelly hadn't considered involving law enforcement. The situation had been so confusing and official sounding that she'd assumed it was a legitimate dispute rather than potential fraud. After hanging up with Sarah, Kelly Googled Tenant Rights Attorney Portland and found several law firms that specialized in landlord-tenant disputes. Most offices were closed for the evening, but one firm, Morrison & Associates, had an emergency hotline for urgent tenant issues. She dialed the emergency number, expecting to leave a voicemail. Instead, a woman's voice answered after 3 rings. Morrison & Associates, emergency line, this is attorney Rachel Morrison. How can I help you? Kelly was surprised to reach a live person. Miss Morrison, my name is Kelly Martinez, and I'm locked out of my apartment. Someone claiming to be a property management company changed my locks while I was at work, but I think it might be fraudulent. That's definitely an urgent situation. Can you give me the details? Kelly recounted the day's events, from the mysterious phone calls to finding her locks changed to discovering her landlord's disconnected phone number. Rachel Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Ms. Martinez, what you're describing sounds like either an elaborate scam or a seriously illegal eviction attempt. Oregon has very strict laws about changing locks and tenant displacement. Even in legitimate foreclosure situations, tenants retain specific rights that appear to have been violated here. So, what they did was illegal?
If your account is accurate, then yes, absolutely. Landlords cannot change locks without following proper legal procedures, providing written notice, and obtaining court orders when necessary. The timeline you've described is impossible under Oregon tenant protection laws. Kelly felt a mixture of relief and anger. What should I do now? First, I want you to file a police report immediately. This could be criminal fraud rather than just a civil landlord-tenant dispute. Second, document everything. Save all voicemails, text messages, and take photos of your changed locks. Third, I want to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning to review your lease and discuss emergency legal remedies. Can you help me get back into my apartment tonight? All my belongings are in there. We'll work on that. There are emergency procedures for wrongful lockouts, but they take time to implement. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Kelly realized she'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't thought about where she'd sleep. I can probably stay with a friend. Good. Let's meet at my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Bring your lease agreement, rent payment records, and any documentation you have about your tenancy. We're going to get this sorted out. And if this is fraud, we're going to make sure whoever did this faces consequences. After ending the call, Kelly felt her first spark of hope since discovering the changed locks. She called her coworker Jessica, who lived across town, and explained her situation. Jessica immediately offered her couch for the night. As Kelly waited for her Uber to Jessica's apartment, she looked back at her building one more time. Somewhere behind that new lock were her clothes, her furniture, her personal belongings, and all the small things that made the cramped studio feel like home. Tomorrow, she'd start fighting to get her life back. Kelly arrived at Jessica's apartment in Southeast Portland just after 10 p.m., exhausted and carrying only her laptop bag and the groceries she'd been clutching for hours. Jessica, a fellow marketing professional she'd worked with for 6 months, welcomed her with hot tea and a pile of blankets for the couch. "This is absolutely insane," Jessica said as Kelly recounted the events while changing into borrowed pajamas. "I can't believe someone can just lock you out of your own home like that." "The attorney I spoke with said it was illegal, but I still can't get my head around why someone would do this. What's the point? It's not like they can rent out my apartment while all my stuff is still inside." Jessica frowned thoughtfully. Unless that's exactly what they're planning to do. Think about it. You're locked out, you can't access your belongings, and eventually you might give up and move somewhere else. Then they clean out your stuff and rent it to someone new. The possibility hadn't occurred to Kelly, but it made a disturbing kind of sense. If enough tenants were forced out through illegal lockouts, someone could potentially take over multiple units in the building without going through proper eviction procedures. Before going to sleep, Kelly filed a police report online, providing detailed information about the fraudulent property management company and the illegal lockout. The online system generated a case number and informed her that an officer would contact her within 24 hours to follow up. She also took screenshots of the Evergreen Property Management website, saved all the voicemails from David Chen, and documented the timeline of events in a detailed email to herself. Rachel Morrison had emphasized the importance of thorough documentation, and Kelly wanted to be prepared for their morning meeting. Sleep came fitfully on Jessica's couch. Kelly found herself jolting awake throughout the night, worried about her belongings and wondering how many other tenants might be dealing with similar situations. At 7:30 a.m., Kelly borrowed clothes from Jessica and took the bus downtown to Morrison & Associates. The law firm occupied the third floor of a modern office building near the courthouse, with glass walls and contemporary furniture that projected competence and success. Rachel Morrison turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with short auburn hair and sharp green eyes that conveyed both intelligence and determination. She greeted Kelly in the reception area and led her to a conference room overlooking the city center. "I've been thinking about your case since our call last night," Rachel began, pulling out a legal pad covered with notes. "I did some preliminary research, and there are several red flags that suggest this is an organized fraud operation rather than a legitimate property management issue." Kelly felt a chill. What kind of red flags? First, I checked county records for 847 Maple Street. There's no current foreclosure proceeding against Patricia Hendricks or the property. Second, Evergreen Property Management isn't licensed with the state to operate in Oregon. Third, the phone number David Chen called from is registered to a different company, a telemarketing firm that went out of business 6 months ago. So this is definitely fraud. It appears to be, but here's what's interesting. This isn't random. Whoever orchestrated this knows specific details about your building, your lease situation, and your personal schedule. They knew you'd be at work and unable to respond immediately to their calls. Kelly's stomach turned. How would they know my work schedule? Rachel consulted her notes. That's what we need to figure out. Have you had any unusual interactions lately? Maintenance requests, surveys, anyone asking questions about your daily routine? Kelly thought back over the past few weeks. Actually, yes. About 3 weeks ago, a woman called saying she was conducting a survey for Portland Metro about commuter patterns. She asked what time I left for work, how I got there, whether I worked standard business hours. I thought it was legitimate. She knew my address and said it was for city planning purposes. Did she give you a name or organization? She said she was from Metro Transit Research, and her name was Linda something. I didn't write it down because it seemed routine. Rachel made notes. We'll need to report that to the police as well. This suggests a much more sophisticated operation than I initially thought. Someone has been gathering intelligence on tenants to plan these illegal lockouts. Kelly felt violated in a way that went beyond just being locked out of her apartment. So they've been watching me?
It looks that way. Let me ask you this. Have you had any disputes with Patricia Hendricks recently? Any missed rent payments, complaints about the property, anything that might make someone think you'd be an easy target for displacement? Nothing at all. I've been a model tenant. I pay rent 3 days early every month through the online portal. I've never had a noise complaint, never damaged anything, never caused any problems. Rachel nodded. That actually supports my theory. Scammers often target good tenants because they're less likely to fight back through proper legal channels. They assume responsible people will try to resolve issues quietly rather than making waves. Well, they picked the wrong person this time. Exactly. Now, let's talk about immediate remedies. Oregon law provides several options for tenants who's been illegally locked out. We can file for emergency restoration of possession, which could get you back into your apartment within 48 hours. We can also pursue damages for the illegal lockout, including compensation for your displaced housing, lost wages from missing work, and emotional distress. Kelly leaned forward. What about criminal charges? That's up to the district attorney, but based on what you've told me, this could qualify as fraud, identity theft, and potentially organized criminal activity if there are multiple victims. The police investigation will determine the criminal aspects. Rachel opened a thick folder and pulled out several legal forms. I want to get the emergency motion filed this morning. We'll need to appear before a judge and demonstrate that your lockout was illegal and that you need immediate access to your residence. As Rachel explained the legal process, Kelly's phone rang. The caller ID showed the same number David Chen had used the day before. Rachel motioned for her to answer and put the call on speaker. Ms. Martinez, this is David Chen from Evergreen Property Management. I trust you received our message about the property situation. Kelly looked at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. Mr. Chen, I've spoken with an attorney, and I understand that what you've done is illegal. Oregon law doesn't allow landlords to change locks without proper notice and legal procedures. There was a pause. Ms. Martinez, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not your landlord. We're the management company handling the transition after foreclosure. Your lease with Patricia Hendricks is no longer valid. That's not how foreclosure law works, Mr. Chen. Even if there was a legitimate foreclosure, which county records show there isn't, tenants retain their rights during the process. Another pause, longer this time. I see you've gotten some advice. However, our legal position is clear. The property owner defaulted on obligations, and we have authority to secure the premises. If you'd like to discuss a new lease arrangement, we can schedule an appointment. Rachel took the phone. Mr. Chen, this is attorney Rachel Morrison representing Ms. Martinez. Your actions constitute illegal lockout under Oregon Revised Statutes Chapter 90. We're filing emergency motions this morning to restore my client's possession, and we're referring this matter to law enforcement for criminal investigation. I'm sorry, who is this? Rachel Morrison, licensed attorney with the Oregon State Bar. I'm advising you that continuing this fraud will result in serious legal consequences. My client will be restored to her apartment, and your organization will face civil and criminal liability. The line went quiet for several seconds. Ms. Martinez, we'll be in touch through proper legal channels. The call ended abruptly. Rachel smiled grimly. That went better than I expected. Did you notice how his story changed when confronted with legal facts? First, he claimed foreclosure authority, then he offered to negotiate a new lease. That's not how legitimate property managers operate. Kelly felt energized by Rachel's confident handling of the situation. What happens next? We head to the courthouse and file our emergency motion. I'm confident we'll get you back into your apartment by tomorrow. Then we start building a case for damages and working with police to track down whoever's behind this operation. As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Kelly's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Threatening call or face consequences. This is your only warning. Rachel read the message and immediately took screenshots. Well, that was stupid of them. Threatening a tenant who's already working with an attorney just gave us additional criminal charges to pursue. Kelly stared at the threatening text, feeling a mixture of fear and anger. Are they dangerous? Probably not. This looks like a financial scam, not violent crime. But we're definitely dealing with people who don't understand. As they walked toward the courthouse, Kelly felt a growing sense of determination. These criminals had picked the wrong tenant, and with Rachel's help, she was going to make sure they faced the full consequences of their actions. The Multnomah County Courthouse buzzed with morning activity as Kelly and Rachel made their way through security and up to the third floor where emergency tenant hearings were held. Rachel carried a thick briefcase filled with documents, while Kelly clutched a folder containing her lease agreement, rent payment records, and printed screenshots of all the fraudulent communications. Judge Patricia Williams is hearing emergency motions today, Rachel explained, as they waited in the hallway outside courtroom 3B. She's been on the bench for 15 years and has a strong record on tenant rights. That works in our favor. Kelly watched lawyers and clients moving through the corridors, some looking confident, others appearing nervous or defeated. She tried to calm her racing heart by focusing on the facts Rachel had laid out so clearly that morning. At 10:30 a.m., their case was called. Judge Williams, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed the emergency motion while Kelly and Rachel stood at the plaintiff's table. The defendant's table remained empty. Ms. Morrison, I've reviewed your emergency filing for restoration of possession. Can you summarize the key facts for the court? Rachel stepped forward confidently. Your Honor, my client Kelly Martinez was illegally locked out of her apartment at 847 Maple Street while she was at work yesterday. Individuals claiming to represent Evergreen Property Management changed her locks without proper notice, legal justification, or following Oregon's required procedures for tenant displacement. Judge Williams looked up from the papers. And the defendant's response to these allegations? They failed to appear, Your Honor, despite being served with notice of this hearing. However, they did contact my client this morning with what appeared to be additional threats and attempts to legitimize their illegal actions. The judge frowned. What kind of threats? Kelly stepped forward slightly as Rachel nodded to her. Your Honor, after I hired an attorney, they sent me a text message saying I should stop causing problems or face consequences. My attorney has screenshots of the message. Judge Williams gestured for Rachel to approach the bench with the evidence. After reviewing the threatening text and listening to recordings of David Chen's phone calls, her expression grew stern. This appears to be a clear case of illegal lockout under ORS 90.375. Ms. Morrison, what specific relief are you seeking? Immediate restoration of possession to my client's apartment, Your Honor. We also request that the court order the defendants to provide new keys within 4 hours and to cease all contact with my client except through legal counsel. Judge Williams made notes on her legal pad. And what about the alleged property management company's claims regarding foreclosure? Rachel pulled out county records she'd obtained that morning. Your Honor, I've verified through Multnomah County records that there is no active foreclosure proceeding against 847 Maple Street. The property owner, Patricia Hendricks, has no recorded defaults or legal actions against her property. The defendant's foreclosure claims appear to be entirely fabricated. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the county records and comparing them to the timeline Kelly had documented. Finally, she looked up with a decisive expression. Based on the evidence presented, I find that defendants have committed illegal lockout in violation of Oregon tenant protection statutes. Ms. Martinez, you are entitled to immediate restoration of possession of your apartment. The court orders that defendants provide working keys to apartment 3C at 847 Maple within 4 hours of this ruling. Kelly felt a surge of relief and vindication. Judge Williams continued. Furthermore, defendants are ordered to cease all contact with the plaintiff except through licensed attorneys. Any violation of this order will result in contempt of court charges. Ms. Morrison, please prepare orders reflecting this ruling for my signature. Thank you, Your Honor. We'll also be filing a motion for damages related to this illegal lockout. That can be scheduled for a full hearing once defendants have proper legal representation. This court takes tenant rights very seriously, and the behavior described here is completely unacceptable under Oregon law. As they left the courthouse, Kelly felt like she was walking on air. I can't believe how quickly that happened. Emergency tenant hearings are designed to work fast when the facts are clear. Now we need to enforce the order. If they don't provide keys within 4 hours, we can have the sheriff's department assist us. Kelly checked her phone. It was 11:45, which meant the defendants have until 3:45 to comply with the court order. What happens if they just ignore the order? Then they'll be in contempt of court, which is a criminal matter. Plus, we can get a locksmith and bill them for the costs. Either way, you're getting back into your apartment today. Rachel drove Kelly back to Maple Street so they could serve the court order on anyone still present at the building. As they pulled up to the curb, Kelly noticed a white van parked in front that hadn't been there the night before. 2 men in gray uniforms were loading boxes and furniture into the van from the building's service entrance. Kelly's blood ran cold as she recognized her own coffee table and desk lamp among the items being loaded. "They're stealing my stuff!" Kelly shouted, jumping out of the car. Rachel grabbed her arm. "Wait, let me handle this legally." She pulled out her phone and called 911 while taking photos of the van, the license plate, and the men loading Kelly's belongings. "This is attorney Rachel Morrison. I need a police response at 847 Maple Street immediately. We have a court order for restoration of possession, and the defendants are currently removing the tenant's personal property in violation of the order." Within minutes, 2 Portland police officers arrived on scene. Officer Martinez, no relation to Kelly, and Officer Thompson took statements, while the 2 men in gray uniforms stood by their van looking increasingly uncomfortable. The older man, who matched Mrs. Chen's description of Mike something, produced a clipboard with official-looking papers. "Officers, we're authorized by Evergreen Property Management to clear units with abandoned property."
Officer Martinez examined the papers while Rachel showed him the court order. Sir, this property isn't abandoned. We have a court order issued 2 hours ago restoring possession to the tenant. You're in violation of that order. We never received any court order, Mike protested. Rachel stepped forward. Oregon law doesn't require personal service for emergency tenant orders when defendants fail to appear in court. The order is valid and enforceable immediately. Officer Thompson walked to the van and began documenting the items inside. Ma'am, can you identify which of these belongings are yours? Kelly looked into the van and felt sick. Her furniture, clothes, kitchen items, electronics, and personal photographs were all jumbled together in boxes and garbage bags. Almost everything in there is mine. They've packed up my entire apartment. The younger man, in the baseball cap, shifted nervously. Look, we're just contractors. We were hired to clear specific units. We don't know anything about court orders or legal issues. Officer Martinez took down their information while Rachel photographed everything for evidence. You'll need to unload all this property immediately and return it to the apartment. Then you'll need to provide working keys as ordered by the court. Mike hesitated. We don't have keys. We were just told to clear the unit and secure it. Then who does have keys? Officer Thompson asked. Our supervisor, I guess. David Chen handles all that stuff. Rachel and Kelly exchanged glances. They finally had a direct connection between the men physically changing locks and the person who had been making threatening phone calls. Officer Martinez called for a supervisor while the two contractors began the laborious process of unloading Kelly's belongings and carrying them back up to the 3rd floor. Kelly watched her personal possessions being hauled back into the building, realizing how close she'd come to losing everything. They would have just thrown away my stuff? She asked Rachel. Probably sold it or dumped it, depending on the value. This is clearly a well-organized operation designed to force tenants out and profit from their belongings. As the contractors worked, Kelly's phone rang. David Chen's number appeared on the screen. Rachel motioned her to answer while Officer Thompson listened in. Miss Martinez, I understand there's been some confusion about the property clearing. We can arrange to have your belongings stored until we resolve the lease situation. Mr. Chen, this is attorney Rachel Morrison. My client has a court order restoring her possession of the apartment. Your contractors are currently returning her property under police supervision. You have until 3:45 p.m. to provide working keys or face contempt of court charges. I'm not sure I understand the legal authority. The authority comes from Judge Patricia Williams in Multnomah County Circuit Court. Violation of her order is a criminal matter. I suggest you comply immediately. Officer Thompson took the phone. Mr. Chen, this is Portland Police Officer Thompson. We have a valid court order and you need to comply or face arrest. Do you have keys to apartment 3C? There was a long pause. The keys should be with the contractors on site. The contractors say they don't have keys. Where are the keys? Another pause. I'll have someone deliver keys within the hour. You have until 3:45 p.m. as ordered of the court. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges. The call ended and Officer Thompson shook his head. These people are in way over their heads. This isn't some civil dispute anymore. It's criminal fraud and theft. As Kelly watched her belongings being carried back upstairs by the same men who had stolen them hours earlier, she realized that her nightmare was far from over. But with Rachel's legal expertise and police support, she was finally fighting back against people who had clearly never expected their victims to know their rights. By 2:30 p.m., Kelly's belongings had been completely unloaded from the van and carried back up to the 3rd floor hallway. The two contractors, Mike and his younger partner, who identified himself as Brandon, stood sweating and exhausted outside apartment 3C, surrounded by boxes, furniture, and garbage bags filled with Kelly's possessions. Officer Thompson checked his watch. You have 1 hour and 15 minutes to produce working keys, or we start making arrests. Mike wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty work glove. Look, officer, we're just hired muscle. David Chen pays us to do what he says. We never signed up for any of this legal stuff. Brandon nodded frantically. We thought this was legitimate property management work.
Chen showed us official-looking paperwork and said the tenants had abandoned their leases. Rachel stepped forward with her legal pad. How many other apartments have you cleared for Mr. Chen? Mike hesitated, glancing nervously at the police officers. Maybe 6 or 7 over the past month, different buildings around Portland. Kelly felt her stomach drop. 6 or 7 other people went through this? Most of them didn't fight it, Brandon admitted. They just found somewhere else to live when they couldn't get back in. We thought they'd moved out voluntarily. Officer Martinez took notes. I need addresses for all those buildings and any contact information you have for David Chen. While the contractors provided information to police, Kelly surveyed her belongings scattered in the hallway. Everything appeared to be there, but items had been carelessly thrown together. Her laptop had been tossed in with kitchen dishes. Her clothes were mixed with books and electronic cables, and several picture frames had cracked glass. They destroyed some of my stuff, Kelly told Rachel, holding up a broken photo of her and Sarah at her college graduation. Document everything, Rachel advised, taking photos with her phone. Damaged property is additional compensation we can pursue. At 3:15 p.m., Kelly's phone rang again. David Chen's number showed on the screen, but this time a woman's voice answered when Kelly put the call on speaker for everyone to hear. Ms. Martinez, this is Linda Chen, David's wife. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding about your apartment situation. Kelly recognized the voice immediately. You're the woman who called about the Metro Transit survey? You asked about my work schedule. There was silence on the line before Linda Chen spoke again, her voice noticeably less confident. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm calling about the keys to your apartment. Rachel took Kelly's phone. Mrs. Chen, this is attorney Rachel Morrison. Your husband and your organization are in violation of a court order that expires in 30 minutes. We also have evidence linking you to fraudulent surveying activities used to target my client. I think there's been a mistake. Officer Thompson joined the conversation. Ma'am, this is Portland Police. We need those keys delivered immediately, or we'll be issuing arrest warrants. The keys are… David has them. He's on his way. Where is he coming from? Officer Martinez asked. Another pause. His office downtown. What's the address of this office? I'm not sure of the exact address. Rachel and the police officers exchanged glances. The woman was clearly stalling and providing vague information. At 3:35 p.m., 10 minutes before the court-ordered deadline, a silver sedan pulled up in front of the building. A man in his late 30s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, got out of the car, carrying a small leather bag. He looked nothing like Kelly had imagined David Chen would look. Younger, more nervous, definitely not the confident voice that had been making demands over the phone. Officer Thompson approached him. Are you David Chen? Yes, sir. I have the keys that were requested. He held up the leather bag with shaking hands. You're under arrest for fraud, theft, and violation of a court order, Officer Martinez announced, pulling out handcuffs. Wait. David Chen backed toward his car. I can explain everything. This is all a misunderstanding. Sir, put your hands behind your back, Officer Thompson commanded. David Chen looked around desperately, apparently realizing he had no escape route, with police officers, witnesses, and his own contractors watching. The whole thing was Patricia Hendrick's idea. She hired us to clear out the problem tenants. Kelly felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Patricia hired you? My landlord? She said you and some other tenants were behind on rent and causing problems. She wanted them out without going through formal eviction procedures. Rachel stepped forward. That's impossible. My client has never been late on rent, and there are no eviction proceedings on record. Mike wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty work glove. Look, officer, we're just hired muscle. David Chen pays us to do what he says. We never signed up for any of this legal stuff. Brandon nodded frantically. We thought this was legitimate property management work. Chen showed us official-looking paperwork and said the tenants had abandoned their leases. Rachel stepped forward with her legal pad. How many other apartments have you cleared for Mr. Chen? Mike hesitated, glancing nervously at the police officers. Maybe 6 or 7 over the past month, different buildings around Portland. Kelly felt her stomach drop.
6 or 7 other people went through this? Most of them didn't fight it, Brandon admitted. They just found somewhere else to live when they couldn't get back in. We thought they'd moved out voluntarily. Officer Martinez took notes. I need addresses for all those buildings and any contact information you have for David Chen. While the contractors provided information to police, Kelly surveyed her belongings scattered in the hallway. Everything appeared to be there, but items had been carelessly thrown together. Her laptop had been tossed in with kitchen dishes. Her clothes were mixed with books and electronic cables, and several picture frames had cracked glass. They destroyed some of my stuff, Kelly told Rachel, holding up a broken photo of her and Sarah at her college graduation. Document everything, Rachel advised, taking photos with her phone. Damaged property is additional compensation we can pursue. At 3:15 p.m., Kelly's phone rang again. David Chen's number showed on the screen, but this time a woman's voice answered when Kelly put the call on speaker for everyone to hear. Ms. Martinez, this is Linda Chen, David's wife. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding about your apartment situation. Kelly recognized the voice immediately. You're the woman who called about the Metro Transit survey? You asked about my work schedule. There was silence on the line before Linda Chen spoke again, her voice noticeably less confident. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm calling about the keys to your apartment. Rachel took Kelly's phone. Mrs. Chen, this is attorney Rachel Morrison. Your husband and your organization are in violation of a court order that expires in 30 minutes. We also have evidence linking you to fraudulent surveying activities used to target my client. I think there's been a mistake. Officer Thompson joined the conversation. Ma'am, this is Portland Police. We need those keys delivered immediately, or we'll be issuing arrest warrants. The keys are… David has them. He's on his way. Where is he coming from? Officer Martinez asked. Another pause. His office downtown. What's the address of this office? I'm not sure of the exact address. Rachel and the police officers exchanged glances. The woman was clearly stalling and providing vague information. At 3:35 p.m., 10 minutes before the court-ordered deadline, a silver sedan pulled up in front of the building. A man in his late 30s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, got out of the car, carrying a small leather bag. He looked nothing like Kelly had imagined David Chen would look. Younger, more nervous, definitely not the confident voice that had been making demands over the phone. Officer Thompson approached him. Are you David Chen? Yes, sir. I have the keys that were requested. He held up the leather bag with shaking hands. You're under arrest for fraud, theft, and violation of a court order, Officer Martinez announced, pulling out handcuffs. Wait. David Chen backed toward his car. I can explain everything. This is all a misunderstanding. Sir, put your hands behind your back, Officer Thompson commanded. David Chen looked around desperately, apparently realizing he had no escape route, with police officers, witnesses, and his own contractors watching. The whole thing was Patricia Hendricks' idea. She hired us to clear out the problem tenants. Kelly felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Patricia hired you? My landlord? She said you and some other tenants were behind on rent and causing problems. She wanted them out without going through formal eviction procedures. Rachel stepped forward. That's impossible. My client has never been late on rent, and there are no eviction proceedings on record. David Chen was handcuffed now, but he kept talking rapidly. Patricia said the legal eviction process takes too long and costs too much money. She wanted to sell the building, but she needed it empty first. She paid us $5,000 per unit to clear out specific tenants. Officer Martinez looked skeptical. If Patricia Hendricks hired you, why did you claim to represent a property management company? Why the fake foreclosure story? Patricia said to make it sound official so tenants wouldn't fight it. She gave us the fake company name and told us what to say. Kelly felt betrayed in a way that cut deeper than the initial lockout. Patricia Hendricks, who she'd trusted and paid rent to for 8 months, had orchestrated the entire scheme to illegally evict her. Rachel was taking detailed notes. Where is Patricia Hendricks now? I don't know. She stopped answering our calls yesterday after you started involving lawyers and police. We were supposed to get paid the rest of our money, but she disappeared.
Officer Thompson radioed for additional units. We'll need to check out Patricia Hendricks' address and see if we can locate her. David Chen looked at Kelly with what appeared to be genuine remorse. Look, I'm sorry this happened to you. Patricia made it sound like you were problem tenants who deserved to be kicked out. We never would have taken the job if we'd known you were paying rent and following your lease. Kelly stared at him in disbelief. You stole my belongings and threatened me. You changed my locks without any legal authority. How did you think that was okay? Patricia showed us fake documents that made it look like you owed thousands in back rent. She said you'd been warned multiple times and refused to leave voluntarily. Rachel shook her head. Mr. Chen, even if those documents had been real, private individuals cannot conduct self-help evictions in Oregon. What you did was illegal regardless of what Patricia Hendricks told you. As David Chen was led to a police car, he called back, "The keys are in the bag, and check Patricia's house on Elm Street. She's been running this scam on multiple buildings she owns around the city." Kelly took the leather bag with trembling hands. Inside were 3 keys on a ring with a tag labeled 3C. She walked to her door and inserted the first key. It turned smoothly, and the door opened to reveal her apartment completely empty except for cleaning supplies and garbage bags scattered on the floor. "They stripped everything," she said quietly, looking at the bare walls and vacant rooms where her furniture and belongings had been just 2 days ago. Rachel put a reassuring hand on Kelly's shoulder. "But we got it all back, and now we have them on multiple criminal charges. This is going to result in significant compensation for you." Officer Martinez joined them in the doorway. "We'll need you to check through your belongings carefully and document anything that's missing or damaged. This is now a criminal theft case in addition to the civil violations." As Kelly began the process of moving her possessions back into the apartment, she realized that her nightmare was finally ending. But the betrayal by Patricia Hendricks, the woman she'd trusted as her landlord, would take much longer to process. "What happened to Patricia?" Kelly asked Rachel. "When we find her, she'll face conspiracy charges, fraud, theft, and violation of landlord-tenant laws. This wasn't just a civil dispute, it was an organized criminal enterprise." Kelly looked around her empty apartment, then at the pile of her belongings waiting in the hallway. Tomorrow, she'd start putting her life back together. Tonight, she'd finally sleep in her own bed again, knowing that the people who tried to steal her home were facing the full consequences of their actions. 3 weeks after regaining access to her apartment, Kelly sat in Rachel Morrison's office reviewing a settlement agreement that would have seemed impossible during those terrifying first hours of being locked out. The criminal investigation had moved swiftly once David Chen provided detailed information about Patricia Hendricks' illegal evictions aim. "The final numbers are better than we initially projected," Rachel explained, sliding documents across her desk. "Patricia Hendricks' insurance company wants to settle the civil case quickly to avoid a jury trial." Kelly scanned the settlement terms, still amazed by how dramatically her situation had changed. $15,000 in damages, plus they're covering all my legal fees. Plus, guaranteed lease renewal for 2 years at your current rent rate, since the building ownership has been transferred to a legitimate property management company following Patricia's arrest. The investigation had revealed the full scope of Patricia's criminal enterprise. She owned 4 rental properties across Portland and had been systematically targeting stable, rent-paying tenants who she perceived as obstacles to selling her buildings to developers. Her scheme involved creating fake property management companies, conducting surveillance on tenant schedules, and hiring David Chen's crew to execute illegal lockouts. "What's the status of the criminal case?" Kelly asked. Rachel consulted her notes. Patricia was arrested at her sister's house in Salem, where she'd been hiding since David Chen started cooperating with police. She's facing 15 felony charges, including conspiracy, fraud, theft, and multiple violations of landlord-tenant statutes. Her attorney is pushing for a plea deal, but the district attorney wants prison time, given the number of victims involved. Kelly had learned that she was one of 12 tenants across Patricia's 4 buildings who had been illegally evicted over the past 6 months. Most of the other victims had simply moved away and found new housing rather than fighting the lockouts, exactly as Patricia had calculated they would do. The other tenants are getting compensation too? All of them, some more than others, depending on their losses and how long they were displaced.
The woman from the Oak Street building lost her job because she missed work dealing with the lockout situation. She's getting $30,000. Kelly shook her head, thinking about how differently things could have gone if she hadn't decided to fight back. What made you so confident we could win this case? Rachel smiled. Honestly, your detailed documentation and willingness to pursue every legal avenue available. Most people faced with what seemed like an official property management situation would have assumed it was legitimate and tried to work within their system. You questioned everything and preserved evidence from the very beginning. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of police interviews, insurance negotiations, and legal proceedings. Kelly had testified before a grand jury that indicted Patricia Hendricks on multiple felony charges. She'd also been contacted by a local news station that ran a series of reports on illegal eviction schemes targeting Portland renters. Have you heard anything about David Chen and his crew? David received 2 years probation and community service in exchange for his cooperation. The prosecutor considered him more of a victim than a perpetrator, since Patricia had deceived him about the legitimacy of the work. Mike and Brandon got community service only. Kelly felt that was fair. The contractors had been manipulated by Patricia's elaborate lies and fake documentation, and their cooperation had been essential to building the criminal case. Rachel opened another folder. There's one more development you should know about. The Oregon Attorney General's office is launching a statewide investigation into illegal eviction practices. They want to use your case as a model for educating tenants about their rights. What would that involve? Possibly some public speaking about your experience, helping develop educational materials for renters, maybe participating in a documentary they're considering. All voluntary, of course, but it could help prevent other people from going through what you experienced. Kelly thought about the 12 other victims who had been targeted by Patricia's scheme and the unknown number of tenants across Oregon who might be facing similar situations. I'd like to help with that. As she walked home from Rachel's office, Kelly reflected on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago when she'd found herself locked out of her apartment. The experience had been traumatic and infuriating, but it had also taught her about resilience, legal rights, and the importance of fighting back against injustice. Her apartment looked normal again. All her belongings had been returned, the damaged items had been replaced through insurance claims, and she'd even received compensation for the emotional distress of being illegally displaced. The new property management company, Cascade Residential, had been professional and responsive, fixing several maintenance issues that Patricia had ignored for months. Kelly's phone rang as she unlocked her front door. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hey, how did the meeting with Rachel go?" her sister asked. "Really well. The settlement is finalized, and Patricia's going to prison. It's actually over." "I still can't believe your own landlord was behind the whole thing. That's so much worse than random scammers." Kelly settled onto her couch, looking around at her restored living space. The betrayal was the hardest part. I trusted Patricia. I paid rent early every month, never caused problems, and she still tried to steal my home because it was convenient for her business plans. But you won. You got your apartment back, got compensated, and put her in prison where she belongs. It worked out because I had help from Rachel and refused to give up. But Sarah, most of the other victims just walked away and started over somewhere else. They lost their security deposits, had to find new apartments, dealt with the stress and expense of emergency moves. Patricia's scheme worked perfectly against them. Kelly had been haunted by stories from the other victims during the legal proceedings. A single mother who'd had to move her children to a different school district after being locked out. An elderly man who'd lost family heirlooms when his belongings were thrown away before he could recover them. A college student who'd been forced to drop classes because she couldn't afford new housing deposits after losing her lease illegally. "What you did was brave," Sarah said, fighting back instead of just accepting what seemed like an impossible situation. "I got lucky that Rachel took my case and that Oregon has strong tenant protection laws. In some states, landlords can get away with a lot more." Kelly's other line beeped with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and saw a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah, let me call you back. I have another call coming in." "Kelly Martinez? This is Detective Johnson with Portland Police. I have some news about Patricia Hendricks." Kelly's heart rate increased slightly. What kind of news? She accepted a plea agreement this afternoon. 5 years in prison, plus restitution to all victims and forfeiture of her rental properties. She'll also be prohibited from working in property management or real estate after her release. Kelly felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. 5 years seems appropriate.
The district attorney wanted to thank you specifically. Your willingness to pursue the case aggressively and testify before the grand jury was crucial to getting this conviction. Most victims of rental fraud don't follow through with criminal prosecution. After ending the call, Kelly sat quietly in her apartment, processing the news that her ordeal had finally reached its conclusion. Patricia Hendricks would spend 5 years in prison for her crimes. 12 families would receive compensation for their losses, and the Oregon Attorney General's investigation would hopefully prevent similar schemes from targeting other tenants. Kelly picked up her laptop and began drafting an email to the Attorney General's office, volunteering to participate in their tenant education initiative. Her experience had been terrifying and infuriating, but it had also taught her something important about standing up for her rights and fighting back against people who exploited others. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a victim of an elaborate criminal scheme. Tonight, she was a survivor who had helped bring justice to the woman who had betrayed her trust and stolen her home. Tomorrow, she'd start working to help other tenants avoid becoming victims themselves. As Kelly prepared for bed in her own apartment, surrounded by her belongings and secure in the knowledge that her lease was protected for the next 2 years, she realized that fighting back had been the most important decision of her adult life. Sometimes, refusing to accept an impossible situation was exactly what made it possible to change. 6 months later, Kelly stood before a packed auditorium at Portland Community College, looking out at an audience of renters, property managers, and legal advocates who had gathered for the Oregon Attorney General's Tenant Rights Summit. The microphone felt steady in her hands, but her heart still raced as she prepared to share her story with the largest audience yet. When I couldn't get my key to work that Tuesday evening, I thought it was just a broken lock, Kelly began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I never imagined that my own landlord had orchestrated an elaborate criminal scheme to steal my home. The audience listened intently as Kelly walked through the timeline of her illegal lockout, the fraudulent property management company, and the discovery that Patricia Hendricks had been systematically targeting paying tenants across multiple buildings. She emphasized the lessons she'd learned about documentation, legal resources, and the importance of understanding tenant rights. The most crucial decision I made was refusing to accept what seemed like an impossible situation, Kelly continued. When someone tells you that you've lost your home and there's nothing you can do about it, that's exactly when you need to fight back the hardest. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. What advice would you give to someone who can't afford an attorney like you had? Kelly had anticipated this question, having worked with Rachel Morrison to research resources for low-income tenants. Oregon has several free legal aid organizations that specialize in tenant rights. The Oregon Law Center, Community Alliance of Tenants, and several law school clinics provide free representation for illegal evictions. Don't let anyone convince you that you have no options just because you can't pay for a lawyer. An older man near the back stood up. How do you know if a property management company is legitimate? Always verify licensing with the Oregon Real Estate Agency, Kelly replied. Legitimate property managers are required to be licensed and bonded. If someone claims to represent a management company, ask for their license number and verify it online before you signed anything or give them access to your apartment. After her presentation, Kelly was approached by Maria Santos, a housing advocate from the Community Alliance of Tenants. We've had 12 calls this month from people describing situations similar to yours, Maria explained. Fake property management companies, illegal lockouts, landlords trying to circumvent eviction procedures. Your case has helped us identify patterns we weren't seeing before. Are they all connected to Patricia Hendricks? No, that's what's concerning. It appears that multiple criminal organizations have adopted similar tactics. Your case became a blueprint, but unfortunately, some people learned the wrong lessons from it. Kelly felt a chill. You mean other criminals are copying Patricia's methods?
Exactly. But the good news is that your willingness to speak publicly about tenant rights has also educated potential victims. We've had several people contact us early in the process because they recognized red flags you described in your presentations.
This was the double-edged sword Kelly had discovered in becoming a public advocate. Her story helped legitimate tenants protect themselves, but it also provided a roadmap for potential scammers who might study her case to develop more sophisticated schemes. Rachel Morrison joined them after Kelly's presentation ended. The legal community has been watching your case closely too. 3 other states have contacted our office asking for guidance on strengthening their tenant protection laws based on what happened here in Oregon. That's incredible, Kelly said, feeling both proud and overwhelmed by the broader impact of her experience. There's something else, Rachel continued. The Portland Bar Association wants to nominate you for their Citizen Advocate Award. It's given annually to non-lawyers who make significant contributions to legal reform and public education. Kelly was speechless. 6 months ago, she'd been a marketing professional with no legal knowledge beyond basic lease agreements. Now legal organizations were recognizing her contributions to tenant rights education. After the summit, Kelly drove to her apartment building on Maple Street. The neighborhood looked the same, but everything felt different now. Cascade Residential had painted the building's exterior, updated the landscaping, and installed new security cameras. The building manager, Jennifer Walsh, had been professional and responsive, handling maintenance requests promptly and communicating clearly about building policies. Kelly's lease renewal had been processed smoothly, with a modest rent increase that was well within legal limits. Jennifer had even apologized on behalf of the new ownership for the trauma Kelly had experienced under Patricia's management, though legally they bore no responsibility for the previous owner's criminal actions. As Kelly climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, she encountered Mrs. Chen watering plants in the hallway window. The elderly woman smiled warmly. "Kelly, dear, I saw you on the news last week talking about tenant rights. I'm so proud of how you've turned such a terrible experience into something positive." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I just want to make sure other people don't go through what we did." "You know, I've been thinking about that day when those men changed your locks. I should have called the police immediately when I saw them with those official papers. I was too trusting." Kelly shook her head. "You couldn't have known they were criminals. They had convincing fake documents and seemed legitimate. That's what made Patricia's scheme so effective. Still, I've learned to be more skeptical of anyone claiming authority over our building. If something like that happens again, I'll call you first." Kelly laughed, realizing that she'd somehow become the building's unofficial tenant rights expert. Several neighbors had contacted her over the past months with questions about lease terms, security deposit procedures, and maintenance responsibilities. Inside her apartment, Kelly opened her laptop and began working on her next project, a comprehensive tenant rights guide that the Oregon Attorney General's office planned to distribute statewide. The guide would include warning signs of rental scams, steps to take during illegal lockouts, and resources for free legal assistance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Saw your presentation streaming online. You were amazing. Mom and Dad watched too, and they're so proud." Kelly smiled, remembering how terrified she'd been during that first phone call to Rachel Morrison. Public speaking had never been her strength, but sharing her story had become easier with practice. More importantly, it had become meaningful in ways she'd never expected. A knock at her door interrupted her work. Kelly looked through the peephole and saw Jennifer Walsh, the building manager, holding an envelope. "Hi, Kelly. Sorry to bother you. I have something that came for you through our corporate office." Kelly opened the door and accepted the envelope, which bore the return address of the Oregon State Bar Association. Inside was a formal letter notifying her that she'd been selected to receive the Outstanding Citizen Advocate Award for her contributions to tenant rights education and legal reform. "This is incredible," Kelly said, reading the letter twice to make sure she understood correctly. "What is it?" Jennifer asked. "The State Bar Association is giving me an award for advocacy work. I never thought something like this would come from being illegally evicted." Jennifer smiled. "Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the most meaningful outcomes. You've helped a lot of people avoid what you went through."
After Jennifer left, Kelly sat at her kitchen table reading the award letter and reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a victim of an elaborate criminal scheme. Today, she was a recognized advocate helping to strengthen tenant protections across multiple states. Her laptop chimed with an email from a law student at Lewis and Clark who was writing her thesis on illegal eviction schemes. Miss Martinez, your case has become a cornerstone as my research on landlord fraud. Would you be willing to participate in an interview about the psychological impact of housing displacement? Kelly replied affirmatively, adding the interview to her growing calendar of advocacy activities. Tomorrow, she had a podcast recording about rental scams. Next week, she was speaking at a conference in Seattle. And next month, she'd be testifying before the Oregon legislature about proposed tenant protection reforms. As evening settled over Portland, Kelly looked around her apartment with deep satisfaction. This small studio had become more than just her home. It had become the symbol of her refusal to accept injustice. Fighting for this space had taught her about legal rights, personal resilience, and the power of standing up to exploitation. Kelly opened her laptop and continued writing the tenant rights guide, knowing that somewhere in Oregon, another renter might soon face an impossible situation similar to hers. When that happened, they'd have resources, knowledge, and legal protections that existed partly because she'd refused to walk away when Patricia Hendricks tried to steal her home. Sometimes the most important victories came from simply refusing to accept defeat. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.